Hey guys, today I'm back with an update to my unlimited powered wizard build. In my opinion, this is the strongest PvE build for the wizard class, and in this update I managed to achieve more than double the damage of my previous build, so there's going to be a lot to cover. So I'm going to start off with a 1-minute damage test really quick. Something worth mentioning about running damage tests on the dummy is that your character position is extremely important. So you can see my starting position here. Basically I ran hundreds of damage tests, just testing out all kinds of different things last week, and even without changing anything in my setup, just running different damage tests back to back, I had quite a bit of variance in the damage output simply based on where my character was standing at the start of the test. So for this version that I'm showing today, I had results ranging from 19 million per second to about 23 million per second over a 1-minute damage test, which is pretty impressive. Another thing which I want to mention is that when you make changes to your character with slight differences to your gem setup or your magic attributes, it can actually have a huge impact on the overall result, and some choices which I've made in this video might not be the best choices for you depending on what you choose to go with there, but just equipping the same essence and the same skills isn't going to be enough to give you the best results. So please watch the full video carefully. I'm going to have a section where I talk about all of the choices that I've made and the reasoning behind them, and if you're not quite doing as much damage as I've shown here, then please do watch that section. But for now I'm going to look at the damage breakdown that I have here. So as you can see from a 1-minute damage test, I had about 23 million damage per second with a total of 1.4 billion damage done. So here you can see that the majority of the damage is coming from Lightning Nova and Arcane Wind, and both skills have about equal damage, which is almost 500 million, and then Disintegrate is just behind them with about 100 million damage less, and then Electrocute, which is the primary attack, isn't doing that much damage, but that's not the real purpose of it. The crazy thing about this damage output, which I haven't mentioned yet, is that I'm only running with about a 3k resonance setup, and this is actually a lot lower than my maximum resonance, which is about 5.5k. I think it's really important to actually take a look at the damage breakdown so you can see exactly where the damage is coming from. Usually when I run these damage tests, I do like to have the breakdown actually open so you can see if your skills are doing damage properly, because if you're not positioned in the right way, like I said, your skills might be misfiring and not actually hitting the dummy targets. The way that I'm going to structure this video is that I'm going to show everything that I'm using for the build, then I'm going to show the build in action in a challenge dungeon, then I'm going to have a really important section and talk more in depth about the choices that I've made as well as the most important magic attributes. Then I'm going to have a small section where I talk about the future improvements, because I still think that this build has a long way to go, as you'll see, and I do believe that this build can hit over 2 billion damage, maybe even 2.5 billion. Then for the final section I'm going to talk about variations to the build and maybe share a bit more gameplay. So let's just jump right in. For the skills that I'm using, I went for Slow Time, Lightning Nova, Disintegrate, Arcane Wind, and then for the primary attack, it's also a really important choice, it's Electrocute. And then let's take a look at the essence that I'm using. So if you're aware of my other videos where I covered the unlimited power build before, it's basically a spam build for wizard where you can spam all of your skills and just do an insane amount of damage. So the key essence of this build is the helmet essence, which is the Terminus Facade. If you don't have this helmet, then you basically can't get this build to work. This is the most important part, the helmet, and I'm not going to spend all this time to bore you, but basically what it does is it allows your slow time to basically reset your cooldowns for every other skill that you spam. And for the chest essence for Lightning Nova, I'm using the Isolated Storm, which gives the most amount of damage. For the shoulders and pants, I'm using the War Mage Mantle for Disintegrate, and I'm using Hasten Oblivion, which is going to reset all of the cooldowns. And then for the main hand, I'm using the Eye Plucker, which works with Electrocute and gives us the shock effect which we need. And this shock effect is crucial because we're using the Trifling Piffle offhand, and what this allows us to do is give us more Lightning Novas when it hits a shocked enemy, which is really good. And then for the last skill, which is Arcane Wind, I'm using 2 essence, which is Mistral Rend and the Blood of the Wind, which is going to give us a really nice damage on the Firestorm. So I've gone through most of these essence before. The only differences I've made compared to my previous version is I've went back to Disintegrate with the War Mage Mantle, because I believe that honestly with the Hasten Oblivion pants, this just allows us to spam the most, because the Hasten Oblivion, what it says is that Disintegrate's cooldown is reduced by 1.6 seconds when damaging enemies, and you'd think that this just affects Disintegrate, but like I said, because of slow time, if we have a look at it in the skills menu here, we can see that it says that slow time basically reduces the cooldown of your other skills by 1.2 seconds whenever you press a skill. So each time you press a non-channel skills, it's going to give you this 1.2 second cooldown. So every time your Disintegrate hits an enemy, it's going to reduce its own cooldown, and then when you spam it again, it's going to basically reduce the cooldown cooldown of your Arcane Wind and also your Lightning Nova. So as far as these sets go, I've also decided to change it up here. So I'm using 2 pieces of Vithus for the beneficial effect duration, and then I'm using 2 pieces of Banquet for the extra 15% damage, and then finally I'm using 4 pieces of Barons for the extra harmful duration, and more importantly for the 4-piece bonus, which is going to give you an extra 20% damage to enemies under your loss of control effects, which is really good. So compared to my previous build, I was using 4 pieces of Vithus and 4 pieces of Banquet, and the reason for that is honestly because I didn't have high enough critical hit chance. So the Banquet set, the 4-piece bonus, gives a really nice critical hit chance when you apply continual damage effects, and this stacks up to 25%, which is really good. But I always complained that my gem setup wasn't optimal for my build, so I decided to say, hey, well, I'm gonna actually sacrifice some of my resonance here and go for some lower rank gems. As you can see, I'm using this rank 7 Mother's Lament. I'll talk a bit more about my legendary gems and the reasoning behind them, but basically since I actually went for more optimal gems, I could go for also more optimal sets. So this is what I mean by making different choices for your build, because when you actually change your gem setup, suddenly the most optimal sets might not be the same. So like I said here, I actually am using the 2-piece of Vithus Urge instead of the 4-piece, and I'll also explain why we don't need this 30% attack speed anymore later in the video, so be sure to watch until the end. Moving on now to talk about the legendary gems that I'm using. I'm using 3 5-star gems, so I'm using Bloodsoaked Jade, Void Spark, and then Roiling Consequence. They're all at rank 6, so not super high ranks, but obviously these are pretty expensive to get ranked up. And then for the 1-star gems, I'm using the Entropic Well. This was a pretty easy gem to rank up and a really nice gem with the increased skill damage and increased skill attack speed, and I'll be talking more about this gem later in the video. And then as far as the next gem, I'm using Mother's Lament for the 2-star. I'm using Pain Clasp. I'm using Morn Skull, which honestly isn't required. It is a really good gem, don't get me wrong, but I know that a lot of people haven't got this one crafted, so you could always switch this out for Berserker's Eye if you don't have it. And then for the last gem, I'm using Fervent Fang. Another really good alternative to this would be the other Battle Pass gem, which is Grim Rhythm. But also, if you don't have this, you could always switch it out for something else that you do have. So basically, what you want to focus with your gems is you want damage multipliers. This is extremely good. So I've got this in my Fervent Fang, Morn Skull, and my Pain Clasp, basically the last 3 gems. The other thing you want to focus on is critical hit chance. So I've got this on the Roiling Consequence and also the Mother's Lament. And then finally, the last thing that you want to focus on is the attack speed. So for attack speed, it's an incredibly useful stat for this build. So Void Spark actually gives us attack speed here, 8%. And the other gem that I'm using which gives attack speed is the Entropic Well here, which also gives us increased skill attack speed, which is 4%. And most of the damage here is coming from our skills, so this is actually incredibly beneficial. Next, let's talk about the Reforges. So for the Reforges, I haven't changed it up all too much. I'm still going for the 3 pieces of the Vengeance set, and I'm going for beneficial effect duration, and then I went for skill damage. So basically I've ruled off all of the primary attack damage, and I've either gone for skill damage 2%, which is really good because all of the damage is coming from skills, or I've gone for critical hit damage on some of these rolls here, but that's just because I managed to roll this first here. But mostly you want to go for skill damage if you can get it. And this setup here is fine. Obviously damage to demons isn't going to affect the dummy, so if you want to go for pure numbers on the dummy, you actually don't want to go for this. Maybe going for something like 3 pieces of the wildfire bonus and then something like elite damage might be better for the elite dummy, but this is what I think is a really nice balance for PvE. And then for the curse property, I've gone for 6-piece detested and 2-piece slashed. You could also switch this up and go for something else if you'd like. Something like 6-piece slashed, 2-piece detested, just the reverse of this basically, would also work really well. I'll quickly show my charm because I don't usually show this, but basically my charm isn't really that good. This is still my old charm. Really only Lightning Nova, Electrocute, and Arcane Wind are the good skills that you want to look out for. Disintegrate is also really good. I wish I had Disintegrate instead of Ice Armor here, or maybe even Meteor here. For my rune setup, I'm not really using anything crazy. The one that I'd recommend the most is having the ZUH rune on both of your offhands, and this will give you the extra 4% critical hit chance, which is going to give you the maximum damage. The other ones which are pretty nice, I mean, I've got the FA rune here. This is really good because it gives you skill damage, and not only that, it also gives you this stat here, which is kind of important. It says your primary attacks give a 6% chance to reduce attack and movement speeds, and this reduction in movement speed is basically what's going to allow you to have the loss of control as well for the 4-piece of Baron setup here. So this is really good. I've got it here, and I've also got it rolled on my helmet here, but I believe with just one roll it's actually pretty good just to have it. And then I've also got it here on this other rune, which is the LEV rune. So the difference here is that I've got critical hit damage, but this is not a must. If you just have the FA rune here, or maybe even the bowl rune would do just fine, to be honest. And then for the helmet and the shoulders, I'm using the TYR rune in both slots, which gives me beneficial effect duration and attack speed. If you also have the OTH rune, which gives you cooldown, that might actually work a bit better. But like I said, the one that you really want is the ZUH rune just for this critical hit chance. Moving on to show my Paragon setup, so I've decided to go for a very similar setup to what I had before. So I went for the 3 top nodes here, and then what I decided to change is the Ranger tree. I actually went for the Bloodthirst and the Superiority, and I believe that this gives the maximum damage on the dummy. The annoying thing about using these skills here is that all stacks are removed when you take damage, so bear that in mind that the bonus from these two isn't going to be active if you're always taking damage. You could always switch these up to something else, maybe go for these 2 runes here, or go for something in the Ranger tree. Other than the Paragon nodes, I've also changed the legendary skill that I'm using. So instead of the legendary skill which I was using before, which is the Death Release, I've gone for the Overloaded, which gives me a 60% increased primary attack speed, and this cannot occur more often than once every 20 seconds. And the reason I've gone for this is because my skill attack speed is actually really high, so it makes it really hard to actually get off some of these primary attacks to apply the Electrocute Shock, and I believe that this makes it just a little bit more consistent. And to be honest, none of these really apply so much. I mean, the other option you have is Lightning Rod, doesn't give you really much damage, so I just decided to go for something like this. And then for the Warband room, this is actually pretty important because I believe it makes a huge difference for the damage on the dummy, and a lot of people kind of don't really look at this, but what I've gone for is the attacker room with 3.5% more damage, and this is what my remnant bonus looks like. Not the best, but it is actually pretty decent. And a lot of people like to go for the size increase, which I believe is the block chance room with Shepherd's Burden, and you can definitely go for this just to have the higher movement speed. Just play with whatever you'd like, but if you're looking to maximize the numbers on the dummy, then you can actually go for this one here, which is really good. And then finally, for the familiar setup, let's quickly also show that. So for the familiar setup, I'm not really using anything different. I'm still using all my familiars with the normal traits here. I really wish that I had critical hit chance trait stacked, but unfortunately I don't. The main thing that you do want though is that for your companion, you either want a Brood Talon or a Skitterwhite with the Lingering Wound skill. I've already mentioned this before, so I'm not going to talk too much about this here. Just before I move on to show the gameplay, I'm going to show a snapshot of the build that I'm using in the armory because a few people have requested for me to show this. So in case it isn't clear, this is the build that I'm using, and here you can see all of the essence that I'm using. I'll move my mouse out of the way. If you want to just take a screenshot or whatever, share it, then you can pause the video here. I also want to mention one thing about the set items that I'm using. So like I mentioned, I'm using 4 pieces of Barons, and this works really well on the dummy and also mobs because you can apply the loss of control, but for most bosses in the game you can't apply loss of control. So what you can do is, if you want, you can switch out 4 pieces of Baron for 4 pieces of Grace. I know that a lot of wizards like to use 4-piece Grace, so that's absolutely fine. Other set choices which are pretty good are 4 pieces of Banquet if you don't have the critical hit chance from gems like Mother's Lament and Roiling, and other options could be also 2 pieces of Wildfire. That one just worked out okay for me. So let's take this build for a spin now. I'm going to try Temple of Namari Inferno 5 solo. I haven't got the weekly chest, so let's go ahead and get this done for the week. And this is actually pretty challenging. Inferno 5 dungeons, especially if you do get the sacrificial power, I would recommend you to back out and just restart this. So we got Rain of Fire and S-Class. So not the best because you will have a bunch of elites, but let's just see how this goes, to be honest. I'm not expecting so much, but hopefully my damage just carries me through. So you can see it is melting through these elites pretty quickly. Just have to be careful of that laser there. So a lot of numbers on the screen, it's kind of hard to see what's going on. Most of the time I'm playing with numbers off, but I did turn them on here just for the video so you guys can see. I'll actually switch over to the damage tab as well so you guys can see. So there we go. I'm down to 20 million damage, which is kind of insane. Just have to be careful to actually dodge some of these. So if you are playing a melee class with the reduction to damage, you won't have to be paying as much attention, but since I am Wizard, which is a very squishy class, have to be really careful here. I don't really like these mages because they have this after death effect there, so down to half of my health, but I'm going to heal up. But a lot of people have been asking me how to deal with sacrificial power if you do get it with this build or a similar build. And the way I can say is what you can do is you can actually just press your primary attack, and that will still do a lot of damage by itself. And don't press your slow time. You can press your other skills like the Lightning Nova, the Disintegrate, and the Arcane Wind, but don't press them like in a spammy way. Just press them every once in a while so you still do damage And you'll find that even like that, playing the build like that, it still does do excellent damage compared to some other wizard builds. So you don't always have to be going crazy with the spam. If you don't want to play it like that, you can play it a bit more relaxed. But to get the most damage out of it, you do want to be spamming. So I'm going to try to get this guy killed without getting hit by the stick. So here we go. Just died instantly there. So I'm going to start to preemptively strike here. You do also want to watch out for your positioning. I'm going to show, so try to hit all three of them here, but you do have to be careful because these guys do spin. And okay, so here we go, just going to try to dodge some of their attacks here. There we go. There's also the Rain of Fire from the modifier. That's a bit annoying, so as usual, my inventory is full when doing this. So that's the usual, to be honest. I'm never really good with inventory management. But what I will be doing is I will be sharing another variation of this build, which is a bit more tanky, because as you can see, this is kind of hard to survive because I have dropped my resonance quite a bit. And for low resonance players or players that just want to survive in harder content like the Oblivion Pillars and such, there will be another build which will make you kind of invincible and will still be doing excellent damage. So here we go. Let's just see how this does on Sargoth. Hopefully I don't die at the end here. And there we go. He just completely melted at the end there, which is really insane. So I'm not going to say that was easy because it is with a wizard after all, but still it does do excellent damage. And if you die once, I mean, it's not the end of the world. So there we go. Let's just salvage. Maybe I can pick up some of this blue items. And thankfully I did get a green from that weekly chest, like I said.